Appetite and Domination. On Vincent Woodard's The Delectable Negro. Vincent Woodard died in 2008 before he could finish the book that would become The Delectable Negro: Human Consumption and Homoeroticism Within U.S. Slave Culture, published posthumously in 2014 after being carefully assembled and edited by Justin A. Joyce and Dwight McBride, with a foreword by E. Patrick Johnson, situating the work within the still-emerging field of Black queer studies. The book is one of the boldest and most unsettling interventions in slavery studies of the past 2 decades, because it insists on holding together 2 registers that scholarship has often kept separate: the literal and metaphorical language of eating, appetite, and cannibalism that pervades American slave culture, and the homoerotic desire that Woodard argues structured much of the violence and intimacy enacted upon enslaved Black men's bodies by white slaveholders and other white men. The core argument. Woodard's starting observation is that the language of consumption, eating, appetite, hunger, cannibalism, saturates the archive of American slavery far beyond its literal register. Slaveholders describe their control over enslaved people in terms of devouring and being fed by Black bodies and labor. Slave narratives, including Frederick Douglass's, use imagery of being eaten alive or fattened for consumption. And actual practices of forced feeding, deliberate starvation, and grotesque culinary display of Black bodies appear across the historical record as instruments of domination in their own right. Woodard treats this consumption imagery not as incidental metaphor, but as evidence of a genuine psychosexual economy of slavery, in which the enslaved Black male body in particular was constructed as an object simultaneously of economic exploitation, physical appetite, and homoerotic desire on the part of white men who held power over it. From this, Woodard develops his most provocative claim, that scenes of extreme violence against enslaved men, including whipping, mutilation, and other forms of bodily discipline, cannot be adequately understood through a framework of pure domination or pure economic exploitation alone, because the historical record shows these scenes were frequently charged with an eroticized intensity that implicates desire, not just discipline, in the mechanics of slaveholder violence. Woodard is not arguing that slaveholders were secretly or consciously gay in a modern identitarian sense. He is arguing that the libidinal economy of American slavery, the circuits of desire, appetite, and pleasure running through its violence, included a homoerotic dimension that scholarship on slavery has largely declined to name, and that this dimension needs to be understood as constitutive of, not incidental to, how slavery actually operated as a lived system of domination. What the book gets right. The book's central achievement is refusing a tidy separation between slavery's violence and slavery's intimacies, a separation that Woodard argues has allowed scholarship to acknowledge the sexual exploitation of enslaved women, a subject with a substantial existing literature, while largely declining to examine the specifically homoerotic dimensions of violence against enslaved men, treating that violence as though it operated in a register untouched by desire. In doing so, Woodard extends a body of Black feminist and queer theoretical work, Hortense Spillers' account, in Mama's Baby, Papa's Maybe, of how slavery ungendered the enslaved body and reduced it to undifferentiated flesh, available for any use its owner wished to make of it, and Saidiya Hartman's Scenes of Subjection, with its account of the unsettling proximity between violence and pleasure, terror, and what Hartman calls innocent amusements, in the archive of slavery, into new territory by insisting that Black queer studies is not a marginal specialization to be added on to slavery studies after the fact, but a necessary lens for understanding how slavery functioned at all. The book's archival range is genuinely wide, drawing on slave narratives, plantation records, folklore, and literary sources to build its case, and its willingness to sit with material that is genuinely difficult, scenes that resist a comfortable moral vocabulary of pure victimhood and pure villainy, has been widely credited, including by the Lambda Literary Award the book received, as opening space within Black studies for a more complicated reckoning with how desire and domination were entangled under slavery, rather than treating that entanglement as unspeakable or as a betrayal of the enslaved. Nefrestaras, where the argument strains reviewers, including scholars sympathetic to the book's larger project, have raised several serious methodological and interpretive concerns.
The line between literal and metaphorical claims is not always held steady. Woodard's evidence ranges from clearly documented literal practices, forced feeding, starvation as punishment, to language that is more clearly figurative, and to interpretive readings of scenes whose sexual charge is inferred by Woodard from tone, structure, and context rather than stated directly in the sources. Some reviewers have argued that the book does not always distinguish clearly enough between consumption as a demonstrated historical practice, consumption as a pervasive cultural metaphor, slaveholders and enslaved people both used, and consumption as an interpretive frame Woodard applies to scenes the original sources do not explicitly sexualize, a slippage that can make it difficult to assess exactly how much evidentiary weight any given claim can bear. The psychoanalytic reading of slaveholder desire is necessarily speculative, attributing homoerotic desire to historical actors who left no direct testimony to that effect is an inherently interpretive project, dependent on reading violence and its documentation for latent meanings. The original actors did not, and mostly could not, state openly given the period's own categories of sexuality. This is a limitation common to psychohistory generally, and Woodard's readings are careful and theoretically grounded rather than casual. But critics have noted that the persuasiveness of any individual claim depends heavily on accepting a specific interpretive framework that the sources themselves cannot fully confirm or disconfirm. The project raises the same ethical question that has shadowed Hartman's work and the broader history of Black suffering literature, by insisting on the presence of desire and even a kind of perverse pleasure within scenes of extreme violence against enslaved people. The book runs the risk, one it shares with and partly inherits from Hartman's own project, of appearing to aestheticize or eroticize Black suffering for a contemporary readership, even when the explicit intent is the opposite, to expose an uncomfortable truth about how domination actually operated, rather than to sensationalize it. Scholars including Christina Sharp, working in an adjacent tradition on the afterlives of slavery's violence and in the wake, have pressed on related questions about the ethics and risks of representing Black bodily suffering within scholarship and literature more broadly. A debate Woodard's book sits squarely inside without fully resolving on its own terms. The book's posthumous edited completion leaves open questions about its final shape. Because Woodard died before finishing the manuscript, the published book is necessarily a collaborative reconstruction by his editors, working from his existing drafts and notes. Reviewers have generally praised Joyce and McBride's editorial care, but the book inevitably reads, in places, more as a series of powerful, exploratory provocations than as a single, fully systematized argument carried through to a settled conclusion. A character the editors could soften through careful arrangement, but not fully resolve, since the underlying scholarly work was, by the nature of its author's death, left incomplete. Why the book still matters. These qualifications do not diminish what the book accomplished. It remains one of the founding texts of Black queer studies engagement with the history of American slavery, and it forced a field that had grown comfortable with certain vocabularies of violence and victimhood to reckon with a dimension of slavery's psychosexual life that earlier scholarship had largely left unexamined. Whether or not every specific reading fully persuades, Woodard's central insistence that the archive of slavery cannot be adequately understood without attending to appetite, desire, and eroticism as forces operating alongside, and sometimes indistinguishable from, its violence, has become an unavoidable reference point for scholars working at the intersection of slavery studies and queer theory since the book's publication.